Еще раз, у нас заключительная панель. Тема ее на доске «Споживание музыки в цифровую эпоху» и потребление музыки в цифровую эпоху. Мы разберем сами термины, понятия, что такое цифровая эпоха, когда она началась. У нас сегодня сразу два гостя, оба непосредственно связаны с дистрибьюцией музыки, со стримингами и с тем, собственно, как бы много лет работают на то, чтобы музыка, которую все мы слушаем в своих ноутбуках, компьютерах, телефонах, смартфонах и так далее, попадала, и там были все новинки, релизы, все это было удобно. Вот. И у нас есть много интересных вопросов по теме. И для начала я хочу представить участников нашей сегодняшней панели. Это Еллі Джайлз. Она была в панели до этого, и те, кто слушал ее уже, как бы, я думаю, что представили. Я еще раз напомню, что Еллі Джайлз работала A&R-менеджером, это артист, репертуар-менеджер большого крупного мейджор-лейбла Polydor британского, и работала там, насколько, если не ошибаюсь, 7 лет. 7 лет, да? Polydor. Угу. И после чего основала собственную компанию Various Artists, которая работает с такими артистами, как Charlie XCX и группа Libertines. Ну и многими другими. Об этом Элли расскажет более подробно. И наш второй участник — это Каміл Саттар, представитель компании Proper Music Group, человек, который работает в музыкальной индустрии. Я же правильно, вы меня поправили. 16 лет, да? 16 лет. Вот. И глава отдела дистрибьюции в компании Proper Music Group, которая занимается и как музыкой физическими носителями винил, CD, так и цифровой дистрибьюцией. И Proper Music Group — это крупнейший независимый музыкальный дистрибьютор в Великобритании. Вот. Теперь к теме. Я коротко расскажу. Нет, давайте начнем. Сначала поступим иначе. Для того, чтобы мы понимали друг друга более хорошо, та тема, которую будем мы обсуждать, и то, о чем мы будем спорить, она требует вашего немного большего вовлечения, наверное. И мне сейчас хотелось бы узнать, прежде чем мы сами будем говорить, как спикеры-докладчики, о том, что началась там эпоха стримингов, и все слушают музыку только там в Google Play, там, в Deezer или в Spotify. А кто-то, может быть, считает, что наоборот. И мне хотелось бы выяснить, у нас тут должен быть человек, который с микрофоном, да, поможет вам. Вот просто желающие ответить на один простой вопрос. Как и каким образом вы слушаете музыку в 2017 году? Это будет нам интересно и полезно всем. Кто-то есть желающий? Да, давайте.
Да, здравствуйте.
Добрый вечер.
Ну, я вот уже в течение полугода пользуюсь Google Play и покупаю музыку до этого, торренты, пиратская, все.
Вот, спасибо. Кто-то еще?
С тех пор, как Apple Music ввел подписки ежемесячные, другого у меня просто нет источника, $5 в месяц, слушаю и качаю все, что хочу.
Да, здравствуйте. Ну, я плачу за Apple музыку, но пользуюсь Spotify, потому что сервис у Spotify намного лучше. Вот, все очень просто.
Хорошо. А мне плохо видно, мне в лицо бьет свет, но я увижу. А можно, пожалуйста, попросить поднять руки тех, кто сейчас в 2017 году покупает винил или, может быть, даже компакт-диски или аудиокассеты? Хорошо. Ну, то есть тоже довольно немало, и, в принципе, и это хорошо, и это круто, значит, у нас есть повод для дискуссии. Мы будем не только там на протяжении 1,5 часов хвалить стриминги, как это круто и как было плохо раньше, но и обсуждать все за и против перехода, начала, собственно, этой самой цифровой эпохи, которая, ну, есть спор по поводу того, когда она началась. То есть она началась с прихода MP3 или с конца MP3 и начала там эпохи стриминговых сервисов. Вот. Сейчас мы все это и обсудим, и прежде всего я для наших зарубежных гостей хотел бы рассказать немного контекст того, как обстоят дела с способами прослушивания музыки, в частности со стриминг-сервисами в Украине, в нашей стране. Для большинства людей до недавнего времени основной площадкой, это не мое предположение, это статистика, было прослушивание музыки на площадке vk.com. Это сайт очень близкий по формату к Facebook, они даже визуально близки по этому самому, и, ну, по дизайну. Но там был раздел аудио и раздел был видео, где абсолютно весь контент, он как бы был пиратским. То есть просто сами пользователи брали музыку в любых местах, в том числе покупали там в онлайн-магазинах и просто загружали ее туда. Ну, последние годы уже было очень сложно представить какую-то музыку мира, которой там бы не было. То есть там были миллионы и миллионы аудиозаписей, в том числе и инди-музыки, так как большинство украинских, ну, это сама сеть из России, и российских инди-музыкантов сами свою же музыку заливали туда, и это была целая экосистема с пабликами, подписками, которые были тематические для инди-музыки, для такой и прочее. С недавних пор этот сайт в Украине запрещен, доступа к нему пользователи в Украине не имеют, но, например, в России он продолжает прекрасно работать. То есть такого, конечно, ну, это феномен, такого в мире нигде нет, чтобы настолько плохо было все с защитой авторских прав. И до того момента, пока существовал VK Music, представительство большинства стримингов, которые есть в стране, они полноценно работать не могли. И мы тоже об этом еще с вами поговорим. И то, что, ну вот, например, молодой человек говорит, что он пользуется Spotify, это частный случай, очень редкие случаи, когда такой крупный стриминговый сервис, как Spotify, вообще люди пользуются в нашей стране. Я, например, знаю, что представительство Deezer существует, но существовало в Украине нет, в России, например, они существовали несколько лет и были в замороженном режиме. Это был офис, который там работает порядка 5 человек, и у них нет возможности для развития, потому что вот vk.com, бесплатная музыка, если есть все это бесплатно, то человек не готов тратить даже $5. Сейчас ситуация будет меняться. Именно в контексте этого наш сегодняшний разговор, он будет интересный. Более того, у нас был еще свой локальный, опять же, российский стриминг-сервис, который назывался Яндекс.Музыка. Яндекс.Мьюзик. И он, опять же, запрещен в Украине. То есть в Украине это произошло буквально около месяца назад, совсем недавно. В Украине сейчас появляется поле и пространство для того, что ну, нужны какие-то... Ну, в общем, то есть начинается схватка, конкурентная борьба за то, кто первым придет и кто это будет. Возможно, это будет Google Play, возможно, это будет Apple Music, которая пока лидирует на этом рынке. Возможно, это будет Deezer или Spotify, а возможно, появится какой-то украинский локальный стартап. Это для понимания как бы общего контекста. Украинского, надеюсь, я сказал все правильно. Дальше, перейдем к вопросам. Я хотел бы начать с самого простого. Хотел бы спросить у вас, Элли, какой ваш любимый стриминговый сервис как пользователя и почему?
I'm completely into Spotify, so yes, Spotify is kind of... it's very simple, it's really easy, it's very easy to navigate. I listen to a lot of the playlists. Equally, a lot of my colleagues like Apple Music, and the reason being that they're a little bit more album-centric. So it's going to be really interesting to see, because Apple are becoming more powerful in the UK, they're increasing in size, but I would also say that Spotify had a few years on them, and they're certainly still very much the market leader. So yeah, Spotify.
Камил, аналогичный вопрос тоже хотел бы узнать.
Okay, another question. I've been using Spotify since 2005-06. So I've grown up listening to it for the last, and seen it grow. But it's interesting to see other streaming platforms come into the market. And as Ellie said, Apple's become quite a big concern in the UK. There's over 27 million users worldwide now for Apple Music. But yeah, it's easy to navigate Spotify. It's easy to sort of, you know, because a lot of your friends and your family are on it as well. You share playlists. You create playlists around it, and the aim is for a lot of artists in the UK is to be on the bigger playlists on Spotify because of its far reach. We're seeing services like Amazon are coming into the market into the UK, where they have a service where you can buy a Prime subscription. So when I look at the figures that come in every month from the revenue that we generate in the from our artists and our labels, we're seeing that Amazon figures are growing slowly and steady. Google Play is big here. but it doesn't seem to have that much of attraction. It seems to be a bit dwarfed by the Spotify's in the of the UK, of the success of Spotify. So it doesn't seem to have the pull that it does in Ukraine.
У меня к вам еще один вопрос. Возможно, у вас есть какая-то статистика о том, о порядке лидеров рынка именно в Великобритании стриминговых сервисов. Какой самый популярный, и как делится доля рынка вообще между ними?
Okay, well, Spotify is the biggest market in the UK, and they launched pretty much around about the first sort of streaming platform in the UK. So they seem to have around about 80% of the market. The rest of it is then carved up between Apple, and then we have, as I said before, Amazon. We see YouTube is a massive pull for the younger audience in the UK. So we're finding that even though the revenues aren't great, but the actual people that use the site is amazing. It's huge. So those are the four. We see people like Napster who have risen to a point and then they've slowly gone down. And in terms of other sort of streaming platforms, Deezer. Deezer's probably number 4 or number 5 in the UK market.
При этом такой вопрос, то есть немного странное перераспределение долей распределения того, как стриминговые сервисы выплачивают отчисления музыкантам. То есть, насколько мне известно, такие непопулярные стриминг-сервисы, как Pandora, платят больше, чем популярные вроде Spotify, Apple Music и Google Play. Из-за чего это происходит? Из-за того, что не молодым, менее успешным стриминговым сервисам тяжело отвоевать свою долю рынка?
We're finding that people like Spotify have set a level of what the payments will be like to artists. And then when Apple came into the market when streaming, their revenues for artists were slightly higher, and Apple has always been a good payer for downloads. Between all the download markets, all download players, Apple was the best payer for the artists. And we're seeing the same when it comes to revenue coming back from Apple for streaming. They tend to give you a split of 80% towards the artist and 20% to Apple. With Spotify, there's different levels of payment you get. So you'll get a payment for if the person is a subscriber, to if a person is a premium subscription user. This premium subscription user, you get slightly higher points. Ad revenue is down to how many people are listening to that track and the revenue around it. So it's usually around about half what you'd get from the ad-supported services. So ad-supported services always pay less, and people like Pandora pay less because they're basically a radio service, and it's a publishing revenue stream you get on those rates as opposed to an actual interactive usage revenue stream. And plus it's not very prevalent in the UK. Pandora are not in the UK at all because the licensing laws have been difficult for them to get into the market. So you get revenue from them from the States and then from Australia, but not for the UK. So I can't really comment on their levels of payments. I don't hope that answers the question.
Спасибо. Да, спасибо. Thank you. Элли, следующий вопрос к вам. Он довольно широкий. Мы здесь тоже читаем британскую музыкальную прессу, она наиболее влиятельная в мире. Мы опираемся на те издания, которые есть от Pitchfork до NME, New Musical Express. И можно сказать, что прослеживается одна и та же история, которая берет начало еще с 2003 года. То есть пресса, музыкальные обозреватели, журналисты, они, так как в момент появления, например, Arctic Monkeys через MySpace, они были воодушевлены этим и ликовали тому, что наконец-то какой-то ответ удар мейджор-лейблам и их там тотальной диктатуре музыкальной вкуса там, и всего остального. Точно так же сейчас есть ощущение, что они становится на сторону физических носителей. И очень много новостей в зарубежной прессе. Я вижу о том, что ура, Discogs там нарастил там какой-то свой этот самый, выросли продажи винила, в Британии снова растут продажи винила. И это в то время, когда стриминги, и мы знаем то, что Spotify, несмотря на то, что он охватывает уже огромное количество стран и там огромный каталог, насколько мне известно, эта компания до сих пор еще убыточна сама по себе Spotify. То есть это все еще в процессе как бы раскачки, развития этой бизнес, масштабирования своего. Вот. И в то же время идет вот информационная, как бы, ну не информационная кампания, а пресса, она на стороне того, что винил это круто, физические носители это круто, и вроде как стриминги это какая-то такая угроза и новое оружие в там мейджор лейблов. Вроде как это их новый облик, новое лицо мейджор лейблов. Вот какая-то такая ассоциация. В чем суть вопроса? Действительно ли это так? Действительно ли в Британии сейчас все больше людей, которые склоняются к физическим носителям? И почему может быть такая реакция, как вы думаете, на тягу, ностальгию за физическими носителями среди молодежи в том числе, и нежелание принимать новые правила игры, хотя, казалось бы, стриминг, его удобства для всех очевидны?
So yeah, vinyl has gone up, but in the bigger scale of things, it hasn't really gone up that much. The reality is that people are vinyl has this thing that it makes you feel like you've bought something, whereas a CD you don't have the same feeling. The CD you just kind of go, okay, yeah, I've got that. Whereas I think people have started, when they've engaged in music and they're engaging on Spotify and then they fall in love with the artist, then they want to own that piece of that artist, so they normally buy vinyl to own a piece of the artist. So I think that's kind of what is happening, is that relationship where people don't have the same engagement with the CDs that they do with vinyl. Vinyl has like beautiful artwork, you put it on your wall, you can, you know, actually have, it's like a piece of, you know, art in some ways, whereas a CD hasn't got that same feeling. In regards to streaming, I think that, you know, people are less into just one artist now. They're so into many artists. So, you know, that for them, they just kind of dip in and out of different music. So they'll go like, oh, I like that track from that artist, and I like that track from that artist, and I like that track from that artist. And so, you know, that's what's amazing about Spotify, is that it opens doors for you to kind of, you know, get other people that you wouldn't ordinarily get listening to your music. But there is a downside to that, which is building an artist's kind of story. So I would say building an artist's story is what we as managers have to do, is kind of, you know, find out what their story is and try and get it kind of out there. And that takes a lot longer. I'm not sure if I answered your question, though.
Thank you. Камил, вопрос к вам. Я знаю, что у нас сегодня здесь в зале сидит достаточно артистов, музыкантов, и вопрос сугубо практического характера. Возможно, вы расскажете модель, понимая индустрию изнутри, как артисту получить поддержку от стримингового сервиса, будь то там Spotify или Apple Music, кому писать, и как получается так, что в выдаче там самых популярных альбомов, горячих треков и новинок оказывается там 10-15 релизов, хотя мы все понимаем, что музыки выходит больше, и кто-то туда не попадает.
So when we try to talk to our streaming partners about the artists that we're promoting, it's like what Ellie just said. Ellie said it's all about the story. It's all about how you introduce that artist to the service. And it's not just about asking for them to be on the top playlists. They look at everything. Spotify looks at all the analytics. They look at how long people have been listening to that artist for, how the growth numbers are, before any decisions are made about how they're going to promote the artist. And on Spotify, even though it's a great service, it doesn't really bring you that much closer to them. You don't get to know the artist completely because there's so much content on the site that there's limited amount of space of how you can dedicate a promotion to someone on the store. So for the artists that are trying to get on those big playlists, or just trying to get some kind of sort of profile on Spotify, there's lots of tools that they've given you, and other services are doing that too, that you make yourself make it as easy as possible for them and for your fans to find you. So you make sure that you have created a playlist on your page, you engage in that playlist, and you engage with promoting people that are in your scene as well. So you're not just you're not telling the story just about yourself, you're also telling about people that you love and admire as well. So people like to engage with the artist and to get to know the artist a bit better through their own playlists. So we recommend that. We also recommend that people also promote anything to do with their playlist or anything that they're doing on Spotify to their own fan base. And then that then gets the attention of the editors. We recently did a campaign with a jazz artist, and he used to be an electronic artist in the past, in the 90s, and he brought out this concept album.
Возможно, скажете название?
Sorry?
Name of the artist.
It's called Spacebound Apes, and the artist was called Neil Cowley, and he's a pianist. And he managed, we told the story about the campaign, and it was a concept, and he had a blog that he wrote about the backstory of the album and why this album came around. And he also produced a piece of merchandise, which was a piano music book. And the publishers put together this beautiful book that we then sent round to all the key stores, like the Apples and the Spotifys and the Deezers of this world. Those guys looked at the whole idea of the campaign, and before we knew it, we had 2 tracks on the top playlists on Spotify. And this changed things overnight for the artist. From just having maybe 100, 200 streams a week, it went up to 1 million streams. It went up to 15, it went all over the States. And to thank Spotify, in a way, the artist got an opportunity to write about it. So he wrote an article about how his streams had quadrupled overnight and talked about his experience of being on the site, which then continued his relationship with the website. So he's still on those playlists, and he's still making a decent living from being on the bigger playlists. So it's a two-way street. You help the service helps you back.
Спасибо. Я еще продолжение для закрепления этой мысли. И в продолжение этого вопроса, который я задавал Элли, то есть я сам для себя понимаю, почему такое отношение к стриминг-сервисам, что они как бы идеологически близки к мейджор-лейблам, потому что если посмотреть, например, на iTunes, то среди музыкантов есть такой стереотип, что iTunes смотрит просто на цифры, ты популярен, значит ты в выдаче, и значит твоей музыки продадут больше, и это сугубо такой бизнес-подход. И получается замкнутый круг, но при этом площадка, тот же там, например, iTunes, он-то и должен сделать так, чтобы артист стал популярным. И непонятно, где, с какой стороны здесь вход для молодых начинающих артистов. Ваша история, она говорит как раз о том, что если ты креативен, если у тебя интересная идея, если у тебя есть какое-то визуальное сопровождение, концепция релиза, то ты теоретически можешь попасть, получить от стриминг-сервисов ту поддержку, которую получают, безусловно, артисты мейджор-лейблов. Я правильно понял вас?
So the question is, how does an
Давайте я коротко еще раз вопрос. Имеют ли шанс независимые артисты, которые не подписаны мейджор-лейблами, попадать на самые лучшие места, в iTunes там, и так далее? То есть для этого достаточно какого-то креатива там, и так далее, да?
It's hard. There's no easy answer. It's hard because you're competing against hundreds and hundreds of artists, and a lot of it is to do with your relationship with the people that are the editors of the stores. And if you have a company that represents your artist in a way that you can get the attention of them, then brilliant. That's for me, that's the best success I can have. If I can introduce a new artist to a streaming site and you can see the numbers grow. It is difficult, but there's lots of, it's not all about the big playlists. 90% of our catalogue, or even 95% of our catalogue, is not on playlists whatsoever. So you have to create a different ecosystem around your artist, and those stories are then fed back to the editors. If they see people that are engaging with you, on not just on Spotify, but it could be on, say, a tastemaker site, a blog site, those are the kind of things they want to be first to maybe champion them in the big way. But they're doing something in the peripheries, and it's how you present yourself to them.
Спасибо. Или вопрос к вам. Я хотел бы, не вопрос, скорее совет, хотел бы обсудить ситуацию в Украине и узнать ваше мнение. Вопрос прямой. Могут ли стриминг-сервисы эффективно работать и развиваться в стране, где не решены вопросы защиты авторских прав?
I'm not sure. That is kind of, yeah, I guess that's a political question because, yeah, because from my mind, if you're thinking about it from Spotify, if they can't financially account to the artist, then they're probably going to be unable to set up a company here. So yeah, that's definitely tough. I guess it's really a case of kind of lobbying the government and trying to get them to sort out copyright laws. What is your copyright law at the moment?
Ну, это сложная история. Я как бы закон, тут, как бы вам объяснить, закон и его выполнение — это немного разные вещи в Украине. Вот. Но у нас проводятся мероприятия, и они поддерживаются как раз-таки партнерами украинских компаний за рубежом. То есть я участвовал в одном таком мероприятии, его делал американский дом, по-моему, так это называется, от американского посольства, дипломатический корпус, который заинтересован в том, чтобы вопросы по защите авторских прав, законы, поддержку этого всего скорее здесь принимались и нормализовалась обстановка. Как я сам для себя понимаю, это нужно им практически для того, чтобы выйти с этими компаниями на рынок. Возможно. Ну, может быть и нет. Хорошо, я адресую еще один сложный вопрос по этой теме для Камил, а потом мы перейдем к более абстрактным, интересным вопросам, если можно. Да, я для начала просто расскажу, я не для того, чтобы узнать ваше мнение по этому поводу, вопрос будет в конце. В Украине сейчас на данный момент сложилась такая ситуация, что те магазины, которые у нас здесь наиболее популярны, я уже говорил, что это Apple Music и Google Play, их офисы центральные, они находятся в Москве. В то же время в Украине как бы связи бизнеса, там, любые, а шоу-бизнес — это видимая часть бизнеса всегда, они воспринимаются обществом и прессой очень болезненно, то есть гастроли украинских музыкантов в Россию или наоборот, там промоутерские какие-то связи, все это воспринимается очень болезненно. Эта история, она остается за кадром, ее просто никто не обсуждает. И при этом, когда на артистов нападает пресса, общественность за то, что они как-то связаны с Россией, надо понимать, что ни один украинский артист не может отгрузить свой релиз без коммуникации с московским офисом, потому что он находится там. И ситуация эта в ближайшее время, скорее всего, приведет к тому, что либо связи будут разорваны, и Украина окажется полностью в сером поле, без всяких стримингов, без ничего, будет просто YouTube и какие-то нелегальные загрузки. Либо произойдет чудо, и здесь все-таки появятся свои офисы Google Play, Apple Music и так далее. Я хотел бы у вас узнать, теперь вопрос, какие, как вам кажется, должны быть предпосылки для того, чтобы офисы и представительства стриминговых сервисов появились в такой стране, как Украина?
So the idea is to make Ukrainian music industry start from scratch, basically, without the strings of Moscow. And to be able to do that, then, as we said earlier, as Ellie said earlier, there's a conversation to be had with the governing bodies to be able to attract that business into the Ukraine. And a lot of the payment systems that have to go back to artists have to be set up in a way that we can see revenues coming through from the area. only then will you see people wanting to come and interact with the market. Because we're saying that in developing music industries, the artists usually don't even think about the money, in the sense that they know it'll be maybe 5 years or 10 years down the line before they see any money. But they'll see the data and they'll see the analytics. And if the data and the analytics start coming through, then the engagement from the artists and the bands will be, well, this is a place for us to work, to think about touring in, or this is somewhere where we can where we can see our audience grow and become part of. And you know, for Apple Music to come into the Ukraine, it's you know, the live scene is very big here. There needs to be lobbying with these companies to say we are our own company. We are not part of the, you know, the Soviet structure anymore. We have to, you know, it's a PR exercise that Ukraine is going to have to do to the industry to make sure that they can take your market seriously. And with the history of being fed from the Russian government of these are the artists that we think you should listen to, and they're, you know, with the technology that's now available for the radio stations that we went to visit last night, and seeing how diverse the arts program is on the stations, is, you know, the start of something really quite exciting. You know, there's a lot of ethos, as we have heard in the UK as well, of the DIY artist and the DIY label. There's nothing to say that these labels cannot start springing up in the Ukraine, and they have their own scene, and those scenes will start attracting, you know, the media. That's how it needs to work. And, you know, John said earlier in the other panel about schools and being able to access music through lunchtime concerts and gigs. Those kind of sort of cultural level, base level programs are the way to start the industry, and then everything else will just follow. You know, that it just falls into place. So I think is an idea also educating people of being able to pay artists for the work that they do, and for a long time the idea of being starved of making the choices of what scene you want to follow has created a situation like we are in today in Ukraine, which isn't very healthy for the artists, and it's not very healthy for the people, because you feel like you're being left behind when everybody else is, you know, doing Facebook Lives from concerts and places all over the world. And the infrastructure, and people need to start taking your music scene seriously internally.
I think it's about getting facts and figures as well. Kind of, you know, if you can get the biggest artists that are playing the biggest stadiums in Kiev, in Ukraine, that are, you know, and they are playing massive venues, and for them managers and them their teams to come together and, you know, and say, look, you know, we're earning this amount of money from live. You know, we're getting streamed on BK, is it BK, by X amount, and we're losing this amount of revenue, and this revenue you could tax on, and you can make money from, you know, and if you can start kind of building it as that picture, I think that would be really good. And also, you know, as Annika, I really love that music. I think it's brilliant, and, you know, I was saying to the guy who's the label manager, sat over there, who's doing a great job. You know, it was like, it's amazing that he's just gone and he's put he's got a distribution deal in place in the Netherlands. Like, you know, this is the thing. If you can try and get set up outside of the country and start building something that allows you to still get the music heard here, but is getting your money coming from different income streams outside of the country. When more and more of the artists start doing that, what will end up happening is the government will go, oh, well, all the money's going out of the country. Why are we doing that? And will really start changing, I think, their minds. And the way I always see it, it's like it's any diplomacy. It's like working out, what do the government want? They probably want money. So, okay, they want money. How do you give them money? If you can give it in raw figures, they might be more likely to kind of, you know, start seeing. And it also would be interesting to look at is how many users are on BK, how many people are using that, like what they're streaming, and then reconfigure that to see how much that would cost in normal streaming terms. and what they would earn from that. Because at the end of the day, you know, it sounds like people are using VPNs to get to Spotify, to get to Apple Music, to get to Google Play, which is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, that's kind of the only thing I can think of.
Спасибо вам за такие развернутые ответы на проблемные вопросы для нас. Сейчас хочется вернуться, перейти к более таким абстрактным и, собственно, к тому вообще действительно, что такое цифровая эпоха. И к тому, как стриминг-сервисы меняют вообще саму коммуникацию между человеком и музыкой. И первый вопрос такой, если можно ответить по очереди. Как люди меняют свои привычки прослушивания музыки с переходом на стриминговые сервисы?
Yeah, I've definitely changed. I don't really buy albums anymore, which is terrible to say. So, yeah, I mean, my streaming habits is, you know, I'm very much, I'll buy an album if I really, really love that record and I've fallen in love with that record via streaming. But the reality is that, you know, now I'm not kind of, you know, I don't just listen to the records that I own, which is great. And it's great because if the music is good enough, it will get an audience, as long as you do the right things. Like I found an artist on Spotify, and I really wanted to take her on, but she didn't really want to do anything else. The thing is, you can have good music on Spotify, you can have good music on digital, but you have to start building a story, and you start having to make things happen. And you know, Facebook advertising, I think, is a really, really great way of finding an audience. I really believe that if your music's good enough, you can find an audience via it. And also just making sure, but it's going back to the point of digital. I think it's democratization of music. People can listen to whatever they want to listen to whenever they want to listen to it, and that's brilliant. And you know what will happen is over time there'll be this kind of steep curve where artists will start making money. Like I was making a point on my last panel at how, you know, the artist that I'm managing is already making £500 a month, and he's only put out 3 tracks on Spotify. £500 a month, it means that he's earning enough to be able to then put that back in for like art, for artwork, for videos, for live shows. So, and if you know, so how it works in Spotify is like 1 million streams equate to around about £5,000. And that's a lot of money. So it means that artists, if they can get out of the Ukraine and put music into the setup, like in the Netherlands or Germany or whatever, then you could start seeing that money and start being in a situation, and you advertise to German audiences on Facebook. You're opening markets that you wouldn't even dream of. Like before, you'd have to go to a label and get the label to put it out. You don't need to do that now. You just need to find a digital provider who would do that for you. So, you know, and these setups are great because you can go up to someone and go, how have you done it? Who can I speak to do that? And that is brilliant. So, you know, if you're like sat there going, I want to put some music out, how do I do it? Go and ask someone who's doing it successfully here and go, how have you done it? Can you help me? You know, and that will mean that over time you'll start going outside, you'll start building these amazing audiences. But even if there is not that absolute setup here, there is setups outside of the country, and it's only an email away.
Thank you. Камил, я повторю вопрос. Как люди меняют свои привычки в эпоху стримингов? Привычки потребления музыки, прослушивания музыки?
I think what we are seeing now is that because the cap isn't there of having to spend your pocket money on music every month, you have a wide, massive, millions catalogue that you can sample and you discover more and more. So discovery is great on streaming. We're finding that genres are broader. People are sampling more between different kinds of music, which we're seeing for the first time. So the scenes are changing, people's scenes are changing and habits are changing in the sense that they're listening to more varied music and you are more willing to be recommended music through your streaming habits. So, you know, there's streaming habits that are served up via the streaming sites themselves, or, you know, you can discover through various playlists or through various magazines that you follow, and they will serve up the music for you that they think that you might like. So yeah, the discovery is changing, and younger habits are not so much. You know, people are sort of you're seeing that people are sampling more music for mobile markets. So things like Musically is a younger teenage phenomena that's happening over the net in the UK, where people are sampling 30 seconds of music and then lip syncing over their acts and creating a bit of a storm on the website, and then transferring that into YouTube and becoming stars on YouTube. So we're seeing a different kind of way of younger people are consuming music. In terms of catalogue, we're seeing that catalogue is available on streaming sites, and companies like mine, where I come from, we specialise in catalogue. We're not a forefront, hard-hitting company where we're looking for chart placements every week. We're all about how to get the most of our back catalogue, and streaming services are great for them. And we have cultivated a classical streaming market on Spotify, a jazz streaming market on Spotify, on a world music streaming platform, and you play to your niche, your strengths that you have, and hope that people will find you and sample your music that way as well, and then being able to market that effectively to your audience. So I think people are a lot more broader in their choices of music. People are using different ways to be sort of becoming stars in music with the younger generation. So it's really quite exciting, in my opinion, how people are sort of experiencing music. And as we touched before, the physical market is not going away. It's not going away in the UK. It's been strong for many, many years. And we're seeing now more of a 50-50 split of what's a physical sale and what's a digital sale. And my job is doing something that will manage both areas. How can we market as something that's going to appeal to both kinds of buyers? Yeah, so it's quite diverse.
I didn't answer the question properly before. I think people have become a bit more ephemeral, though, in the sense of they've become less attached to artists than what they were previously. So now you'll find that people just go, oh, I like that one track. Oh, I like that one track, and I like that one track, and I like that one track. So you do have that little bit of less kind of artist-based listening, and it's more track-by-track listening. But you know, equally, that I think there's still people want to belong to a group. Still, people want to belong to, like, I want to, you know, be a fan of a rock band, and it's normally because, you know, you want to feel like you're part of something. So people still want that. It's just, I think on the streaming side of things, people are a little bit more. They dabble, I think is the word. Like, they try out different things a little bit more. Whereas before, you'd be very much in one lane. I only like this kind of music, and now people go, oh, well, try that. Oh, I can try that. And it kind of opens up all these kind of doors that wouldn't normally be able to be opened.
Следующий вопрос к вам. Камил сказал по поводу рекомендаций, и об этом хотелось бы поговорить подробнее. Я сам пользуюсь как потребитель больше Google Play, но знаю, что плюс-минус эта модель присутствует во всех стриминговых сервисах, это плейлисты, тематические плейлисты. И тематические плейлисты, возможно, я ошибаюсь, но мне кажется, для большинства потребителей они на уровне популярности там, с разделом новинки, ну, или поиском самостоятельным релиза какого-то. То есть доля тех людей, которые слушают сугубо через тематические плейлисты, она довольно высокая. И плейлисты сначала появлялись просто как музыка для концентрации, для отдыха, для вечеринки, еще чего-то. Сейчас вся эта индустрия размножилась, и плейлистов может быть 50. Для проезда поездки на велосипеде, для кодинга, кто занимается программированием, для завтрака в воскресенье, ужина в пятницу и так далее. Вплоть до того, что это доходит до того, что, например, мне попался недавно в Google Play плейлист, который называется «Музыка для уборки». И в моем представлении музыка для уборка, это я включаю пылесос, а там первый же трек это Йон Хопкинс, который, основательно подходит к музыке. Я понимаю, что я включу пылесос, за которым не будет слышно Йона Хопкинса, а он в этом плейлисте, и кому от этого плюс. Вот, то есть это доходит уже немного до абсурда и поднимает вопрос этический, вопрос того, что для людей, которые потребляют музыку так, а если это еще, например, молодое поколение, которое только в этот момент знакомится с этим, складывается представление, что музыка сама по себе, как искусство, не самодостаточна, что музыка должна быть фоном, сопровождением для чего-либо. Считаете ли вы так, что думаете по этому поводу?
Yeah, I think it's certainly happening. That is certainly the case, that people are just listening to music as playlists. I do it occasionally at work, where I just put on a playlist and just listen to music. And or say if I'm chilling out at night, I'll put on a playlist. But I also make my own playlists. So I think it's always been the case, though. If we look at music consumption over the ages, there's always been people who are die-hard fans of artists, who want to buy albums, who want to invest in music. And there's always been the people who just kind of listen to the radio, and that's all they do. They just listen to the radio. And I think that's what we're seeing in Spotify and any of the streaming services, is exactly the same data, is that you've got your people who are avid fans of music, and then your people who just want to kind of just be curated to. And I think that's, but what's amazing about it now is that you can take someone who's just being curated to and turn them into, finding music they wouldn't have found before. So like, radio before in the UK, we had Radio 1, say, A-list, B-list, C-list, and like a new music list. Now, they only have, like, I think 10 people or 15 people per list, right? So, that's a very small amount of people that could get through that door and get to a bigger level of people. So what's great now is that on all the streaming services is that they've got all these playlists, so that people go, oh, actually, I want to listen to this, I want to listen to this, I want to listen to this. And so it ends up where music is actually getting out to people who really want to listen to that music. So even though music, the way consuming is changed, there's still going to be the people who are music fans, and there's still going to be the people who aren't music fans.
Thank you. Камил, вопрос к вам. Это не мое убеждение и предположение, это мысль, с которой я сталкивался часто. Это мысль о том, что стриминговые сервисы ограничивают музыкальный кругозор слушателя. Они не развивают его. То есть, условно, рождая иллюзию, что все ты можешь найти в разделе новинки, рекомендуемое, там, как-то еще, и, собственно, что это вот вообще вся музыка мира, хотя мы понимаем, что это только верхушка айсберга. Я сам практически столкнулся с этим, то есть я, начав пользоваться, говоря о привычках, о первом вопросе, стриминговыми сервисами, мой вкус ограничился именно тем, что рекомендуемо, и я с удивлением обнаружил, что мне действительно стало лень искать музыку, хотя я до этого В молодости я был диджеем более 5 лет, и это была моей ежедневной работой, и это удовольствие получал от этого, от поиска музыки ежедневного. Чем глубже копать, тем интересней. И понял, что это приучило меня настолько быстро к тому, что я вспоминаю 1, 2, 3 названия какие-то, которые у меня были в голове, не вспоминаю, сдаюсь и включаю то, что мне рекомендуют. Как вы думаете, это какое-то мое единичное восприятие или действительно есть такая проблема, то есть с тем, что стриминговые сервисы, они как бы ограничивают кругозор?
I can see where you're coming from when you're saying, does it limit our outlook? But I don't necessarily agree with it. I think if you're a music fan, then you will want to discover, and being young and being able to be part of that discovery of a scene is very important. And, if you're socializing and you want to be with your friends and you want to impress them, then, you talk about the latest thing that you found on, it doesn't have to be a streaming site. It could just be a general website or, yes, it does make listening a lot easier, and I can understand where the mood playlists criticism comes in, and technology is making it easier. Things like the voice-activated requests like Siri or Amazon Echo is saying put songs on for help me wash the dishes, and they'll just serve you up a whole bunch of music. But through that can also, as Ellie said, there is discovery in that as well. So you might hear something that pricks up your ears. But again, there's the passive radio listener, there's a passive music listener, and then there's the active listeners. And because of the extra sort of availability of it, it's down to the artist to be able to work that little bit harder to create your active listeners and to create your fans. And your fans will be the ones that were with you from the very beginning. Those are your loyal fan bases, and those are the ones that you have to keep on board. So yes, it is harder work for the artists to keep their fans and create the fans, but the technology is out there, the tools are there for you to talk to your people a lot more than you ever have done. So those barriers are then, in some ways, it's very helpful, and in other ways, because there is so much out there, you think that the general public won't know who you are and won't be able to discover you. But the grassroots build is where you'll find the scene evolve, and that's where you will need to grow your audience from that level. And I think people that go in, it's at a point where they think that they're going to get on those big lists or be super served to a massive fan base. It's great if you've got a lot of money and you've got a lot of marketing behind you, but for the general everyday independent artist, it's all about cultivating your market for the audience that you want to serve and what you see as success. Success for you could be just to be able to tour around the country, or to be able to be big in some other global sort of territory. Or it could be that you want to, have £2 million behind you for you to be on the A radio lists and on the top playlists. So it's different for everyone, and listeners are so diverse, and they have so much more in terms of availability of music to be able to tap into and start following. So the trends are, we've got 10 years of streaming in the market in the UK, and now we're seeing the different ways of how streaming is changing, and how they're cutting up things to serve moods, or how we're seeing people being able to sort of manage marketing on services like Spotify, and being able to for Spotify are good at tapping into where the bands are touring, what merchandise you have. So it's not just about streaming, it's about keeping the engagement going with the audience on those sites. So you will see a lot more, not just about just having a track here and a track there. If you go back to the artist pages, you're seeing that sites are a lot more, they feed into things like the All Music Guide, which is very important for you to have a current biog and new pictures and all those sort of things. And you can direct those fans back to your own website to get that extra piece of information about you. So yeah, it's very varied. There's no one answer to this.
Thank you. В продолжение к этой теме о том, что будет, куда это будет двигаться дальше. У меня сейчас, кажется, претензия такой как бы назревшей к стриминговым сервисам, она как раз в том, что, ну вот мы тематические плейлисты обсудили, в том, что пользователь, он остается, пользуясь стриминговым сервисом, остается наедине с музыкой. Есть только он и музыка. Хотя много лет до этого была еще такая как бы имеющая свою романтику и интерес там, цепочка. Это либо продавец в музыкальном магазине, либо диджей, либо какой-то приятель, друг, лидер мнений с хорошим музыкальным вкусом. И в самой этой коммуникации часто было гораздо больше интересного, чем в самом прослушивании музыки. Когда ты сегодня заходишь на стриминговый сервис, у тебя есть там, мы обсуждали в предыдущей панели, пятница, день новинок, выходят альбомы. Я понимаю, что пока сейчас еще такое количество релизов, что копирайта не хватает, чтобы каждый альбом описывать. Какие-то самые основные, насколько я понимаю, есть. То есть ты открываешь и описание альбома. Но очень часто ты открываешь просто год и похожие исполнители, на кого это похоже. И все. И единственный способ выбрать из потока там, 20 альбомов этой пятницы, сегодняшнего дня, это послушать их все или ориентироваться по обложкам, что тоже, кстати, интересный феномен сегодняшнего дня. Вот. То есть люди так ищут. Как вы считаете, ставит ли стриминговый сервис для себя задачу, ну вот именно пояснения, навигации более качественной во всем этом? Насколько это нужно? Или это уже сегодня не актуально? Вот, или, может, вы сначала ответите?
No, it's very relevant. It's very relevant how streaming services make it easier for you to understand where the artist is coming from, and also what other areas of music. If you like this artist, then you might like this artist. So the recommendations is something that is again that we're so used to now that it helps the engagement of people staying on the site a lot longer, and that's what these streaming sites want. And then discovery of music is down to the infrastructure of the country. What radio stations are you listening to? What gigs are you going to? All of that feeds into your tastes and your experience of the music. So the passive listener, as we said, is always going to be there to just the one album a month guy, or those guys are still going to be the mass audience. The mass audience is always drip fed the general what everyone else is listening to. But the general music fan is the one who goes out and discovers the music. And if there is a scene around here, or if there's a scene on the radio that people are tapping into, then you discover more through the websites. You discover more through fan sites. You discover via logging into chat rooms, or you do all of that discovery through the net, and navigating yourself through that. If you're someone from the Ukraine, has become a lot easier. Even though if it is VPN, that's just the way it is. But you have more access to those tools than people have ever done before. So the thirsty and the hungry music fan will find music, and they'll find their scenes, and they will be influenced. And I think if anything, it's become a lot better, and it's become a lot more, as we said, democratized the industry in a way that we're not being drip fed what we should be listening to. You have access to hundreds and hundreds of radio stations around the world. So all of that is, those are the influencers. You follow where you want to go. You're not forced to listen to a certain type of one record label that tells you that these are the top artists that you should be listening to. So the diversity is there, and yes, I think it's a very exciting space. Yes, and sites are getting better. People like Apple have always been very good at curating and editing, and being able to give you a bit of a background and helping you connect with your fans a little bit more differently than what Spotify would do or what Google Play has done. So everyone has their own differences, and people sort of gravitate towards the sites that suit them best. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting space.
I think it's responsibility of managers and artists to also build relationships with people that are like-minded. I mean, really, Spotify is just a distributor. So, and that's what they do. Now, of course, like we had HMV in the UK that was quite big, and if you had an HMV record and it was front of shop, that would probably help sell records, but it wasn't the tastemaker. It wouldn't ever be something that you would trust as if you're a music taste, if you had taste in music. So, you know, that's the reason why there are blogs where people kind of go to Pitchfork and they go to like all the them places. And it's about, I think, ultimately it's about finding, you know, what are the artists that you love, putting on their Spotify playlists. That's great. That's amazing. That's opening, you know, I've seen messages on my clients' Facebook where they've done a Spotify playlist. Wow, I've just heard of this artist that you just posted. Oh, I really love it. It's great, yeah. And that's amazing, you know. That's just like, that's brilliant. So what's actually ended up happening is that a lot of DJs, the smart ones, have gone, I'm just going to start making playlists. And they've started becoming the, you know, the tastemakers. So actually, if you've got really good taste in music, you could become your own tastemaker now. It's just finding who you want to trust. Like, you know, before it would be enemy.com, but, you know, is that as relevant as what it was before? Is Pitchfork more relevant? So as old things go, new things come in. But I think there's always going to be tastemakers, whether that's a radio station, whether that's a blog or whatever that is. But I'm not necessarily sure whether the Spotifys do help you in the logarithm that they use, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily what I would ever use to find music myself.
В завершение моих вопросов, после мы перейдем к вопросам от аудитории, я хотел бы поговорить о будущем стриминговых сервисов и вообще, ну, тем, что будет после цифровой эпохи или ее там развитием цифровой эпохи. Мое представление обо всем этом, оно довольно пессимистичное по отношению к стриминговым сервисам, потому что мне кажется, что история нам показывает, как только какая-то система выстраивается и все становится понятно и удобно для людей, и она тут же начинает рушиться какими-то революционерами, пиратами или тем, кто со всем этим не согласен. И это было основной интригой на протяжении последних нескольких лет. Что же появится такого, что взломает всю эту систему стриминговых сервисов, как в свое время было с Pirate Bay в эпоху MP3 или с пиратскими компакт-дисками ранее. И это стало, мне попалось на глаза несколько месяцев назад, я увидел первые предпосылки к тому, как это будет происходить. Это произошло в Австралии, там была закрыта одна фирма, эти ребята, которые этим занимались, они были все арестованы, это быстро все закрыли. Они сотрудничали с двумя американскими хип-хоп лейблами, независимыми хип-хоп лейблами, которые зарегистрированы, они взломали, я не вспомню, по-моему, это был Spotify, да. Что они сделали? У них была ферма ботов, хочу, чтобы правильно перевели, ферма ботов, боты, электронные боты, порядка 80 тысяч ботов, каждый из которых нейросеть обучила их очень правдоподобному пользованию стримингом. То есть они оставляли комментарии, у них были там лайк-песни, плейлисты, все сформировано так, что это было похоже на то, что эту музыку может слушать один человек. Она не рандомная, это не рандомные подборки. И очень сложно этих ботов было отличить от реальных пользователей. Эти 80 тысяч ботов направлялись на то, чтобы там скачать альбом одного условного Трэвиса Скотта, рэпера, 80 тысяч раз, и постоянно они его прослушивали. Они, вот эти ребята, ну, эта компания, они были в сговоре с этими лейблами, и, то есть, выкачивали деньги из системы, и просто с этим артистом делили, ну, эти роялти, да, помимо того, что артист поднимался в выдаче высоко. И когда шел над ними суд, судебное разбирательство, они сказали так, что вам просто повезло сделать это быстро, потому что если бы это произошло еще через несколько дней, то у нас было бы 800 тысяч ботов. Вот. И как бы если такая система существует, то это может быть серьезный удар и серьезная угроза для стриминговых сервисов, и этому надо будет находить какое-то противодействие. Это я поделился своей картиной развития событий, как это может быть. Возможно, у вас есть мысли по этому поводу. И в целом хотелось бы, чтобы и вы, Элли, и вы, Камил, поделились тем, как это будет в будущем, представлениями.
So this Australian this Australian company that have set up. So what have they done? They've gone into the streaming sites, created bots. I don't understand what's actually happened.
They've created
False
profiles, and they're streaming it constantly.
Like fake users.
Fake users.
Fake
They've
users.
created fake users, right?
Users, fake music, basically.
Okay, and then they've made the money from that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I guess. I guess the reality is that there's always going to be, any system that's built. There's always going to be a way of breaking it down. It's just life, isn't it? Everyone's going to break rules because that's just human nature. So, what I would say is ultimately at the moment, as a consumer of music, I can go and consume any music. I can just press a button and get the music. That's pretty amazing. So you're going direct to consumer, which is, we talk about that a lot in the UK, direct to consumer. So before, it wouldn't be direct to consumer. It would be, what was it called? Before it's direct to consumer. B2B, what's that? Business. So basically, yeah. So now you can go on and you can just click on something and listen to it. Whereas before you'd have to go to a shop, buy that record, then listen to it, come home. So it was always a very slower process. So I don't know how quick you can, if you can make it quicker, amazing. And there is probably going to be situations where people take advantage of them situations. But I think that's been the case with records as well, like selling records. All I know is that there is the transparency of streaming is amazing, and it's democratizing music. So it means that people who wouldn't ordinarily have been able to put music out there can put music out there, and that's brilliant.
So when it comes to making future predictions, I don't have a clue. I don't know. I know that we have, a system where, yes, there's music available for everyone, and how do we make the most of that? And what are the younger generations doing right now? And we are seeing a time where it's not just about the music artists, it's the fans are becoming the artists. We're finding that people are making their own music and creating followers without the use of any kind of music industry whatsoever. They are making music in their bedrooms, they are creating followers, they are then getting picked up by the record companies. So those are the kinds of futures that I see. It's not so much the way that we consume music, it's how music is then served up to us, and where are those artists coming from, and who's doing the A&R around that. So we're finding that places like YouTube is a hotbed for the youth, where young people are being served up by YouTube fans every day, and it's going to be harder for artists to do that, because there's always this mysticism between the artist and the fan in the past. That is breaking down slowly, and we're finding that younger people are wanting to know more about their artist. They want to know what they had for their breakfast. They want to know where they get their nails done and where whatever is done. And I think that's going to be tougher for people from, say, my generation, and but 2 generations down the line is where the millennials are becoming the fans themselves. They're demanding more from their artists. The consumption of music, in my opinion, isn't going to change that much in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. Maybe our access to it and how we get served up from the technology companies will change slightly, and that will be a lot more automated. And maybe if you think of a music choice, it'll just play in your ear. I don't know. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult question, but I know things are sort of we'll see the role of the artist change in the next sort of 10, 15 years.
Thank you. Можем вопросы из зала принять.
Недавно услышал мнение, согласно которому стриминговые сервисы влияют не только на то, как пользователи воспринимают и слушают музыку, но и на то, как новые музыканты и старые музыканты записывают альбомы. В частности, раньше, если музыкант делал 1 или 2 хита на альбоме, он мог заполнить остальное пространство посредственными песнями, и этот альбом все равно мог стать коммерчески успешным, и музыкант мог заработать. В то время как сейчас эта схема больше не работает, и если музыкант хочет выпустить успешный альбом, он должен вкладывать в него силы полностью, делать все песни хорошими или делать его концептуальным. Это не мое мнение, это то, что я слышал. Согласны ли вы с этим и что вы об этом думаете?
Yeah, it's definitely the case. I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's split into 2 different worlds. You've got the artist who makes albums, who make worlds, and you've got the pop artists who makes songs. And pop artists now are, definitely thinking about the Spotify world. I mean, we have a pop artist on our roster, and she wants to make pop music, and she makes pop music that she wants people to engage with. So for her, it's she wants to. For her, she does take into account what people are listening to, and you can get them statistics a lot more now. What people are listening to more than ever before. So what you've found is there's been a real resurgence in like European dance music into the UK, which we never had before, really, like to that extent. And so a lot of artists are now making European dance music in their tracks because you find that that's something that's happening. Real artists who just want to make kind of music that is about themselves are more likely to just not care about that and not be bothered about that. But the way so we're currently talking to an artist about taking them on, and we're looking at potentially doing like 3 different EPs with and make it kind of like a shortened Madonna. So like instead of having long-term albums, having 3 tracks that are one vibe, and then second track that's on one vibe, and then another track, another lot of tracks are in another vibe. Because at the end of the day, everyone's got short attention spans, so we're looking to build a kind of more of an interesting story. And she wants to not be stuck in one area. She wants to kind of, because she's wrote all this different music, so she's got music that's very different to the rest. So she's going to basically block it into different parts and create these kind of identities. That's a totally different way of looking at it, and that's purely because Spotify is so important now that we thought, why don't we try this with a pop artist and see what we can do? So yeah, I mean, albums are less important than they once were. But I would also say equally, if you look at Ed Sheeran, he's built, and his album is massive. So, it really depends what kind of artist you want to be, and whether you want to follow that road or you don't want to follow that road.
Давайте еще один вопрос, чтобы мы уложились в тайминг.
Good evening. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. We've been talking about streaming a lot, but what about the monetization? Because there was time when, artists simply refused to use streaming services just because of the unfair royalties thing. And now they do completely the opposite, so they come back. Does it mean that streaming services became some kind of promotional tool rather than a monetization thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the reality is that if you're signed to a major label, the way the splits work is that, or a label, a lot of the time, it's split 80-20, so the label take 80 and the artist takes 20. And so a lot of the time, a lot of artists were going, well, we're not making any money from this streaming malarkey, we're not making any money. And the reality was because their deals with the labels weren't making any sense for streaming. Now, if you're a new artist and you're coming out and you want to put your music out onto a digital provider, it's the opposite way around. So what they're taking is 20% and you're getting as an artist is 80%. So actually what's ended up happening is that artists now can get value earlier from using streaming sites than ever before. So you don't need to sign to a major label anymore, or a label in any way, shape or form. And in fact, you know, you can start making money, like my artist's making money, £500 a month. It's not very much money, but what that is enough to basically get you moving. So I think the older artists who've been signed to labels for a while, they don't like the streaming services, and the reality is because they're on an 80-20 deal. So they're only seeing 20% of that money. But if their deal was different and they were seeing, you know, 80% of that money and they were not seeing 20, they'd have a different opinion. And I also think that, yeah, it is a great promotional tool as well. So the value in that is huge. It's huge. And ultimately, when you're a new artist, all you want to do is find an audience and build an audience. So, you know, it's a no-brainer to be on a streaming site. And I have to say that when streaming first came out, I was a little bit hesitant, and I was like, really? Because, you know, like, this is going to devalue music. But now I think that the reality is that I've seen that artists can make money early days, and it can be you know, there was a guy who manages this guy called Kieran Lavery who did really well in the States. And they were making, he was doing 1 million streams a month, just like 1 million streams. So he was getting £5,000 a month. He didn't even need to sign to a label, you know. So, yeah, I think that if you're an artist, just do a good deal. Make sure that you have value for your money, and make sure that if that label is going to do that deal and you're going to do 80-20, they're investing so much money for that 80% that it's of merit. Otherwise, find a digital provider and put it through a digital provider. Probably got different opinions.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the old rules of what making money was in the music industry, that everyone was then becoming threatened by the fact that streaming was coming into the market. So the old analog world was that you knew what you were going to earn back from the amount of product that you had produced. But now this was this unknown entity. They were paying 0.009 pence per stream. People were seeing small bits of revenue coming towards them, and everyone was scared. And the bad press started to happen around streaming. But as time has moved on, we've seen the market grow. We've seen more people consuming music through streaming than ever before. And the costs for the artists are a lot less. So you're not paying for packaging. You're not paying for shipping. You're not paying for extra bits of music industry spend that was needed around the release of the album. So for the artists, it's a lot more lucrative to be on a streaming site. And as has been said, you know, you can earn money from the start. You don't have to be part of the big machine. So yes, there was a big issue of streaming at the beginning because people didn't know the potential of it, but we're seeing that now. We're seeing those people like the Radioheads of this world who were very damning of the market and calling it the last dying fart of a corpse or whatever it was, now becoming, you know, embracing it and having all their catalogue up there. So things have changed dramatically. Those column inches that everyone dedicated to damning the services has now become the saviour of the service, saviour of the industry in lots of ways.
Thank you, Камил. Thank you, Ellie. Еще один. Давайте еще один, последний. Хорошо. Last question.
Здравствуйте. Меня интересует такой вопрос. Я сам музыкант, и, допустим, там, когда заливали свою музыку на сервисы стриминга, мы пользовались тюнкором. То есть после этого там с событиями у нас там подписал лейбл, И через время я узнаю, что и лейбл заливает нас через TuneCore. Но, допустим, если мы когда сами заливали, мы получали, допустим, 50%. Я не помню, насколько на самом деле там сейчас точных цифр, но сама фишка, что лейбл сейчас получает ту же сумму, что мы раньше получали, но с лейблом у нас там условия же дележка, получается, мы сейчас меньше получаем. Но вопрос не в этом. Вопрос состоит, через какой сервис лучше заливать свою музыку артистам вот, независимым, ну, на какой самый лучший сервис выдает самые лучшие условия. Вот так.
То есть, если работать самостоятельно без лейбла, правильно?
Да, если работать без лейбла, вот через какой сервис?
Okay, there's services like CD Baby in the US that you can upload your content and they'll charge you a nominal fee. There's TuneCore, as you've used. There's companies called Ditto, which are based in the UK, again, just for unsigned artists. There's AWOL, you can go through AWOL, Artists Without a Label, so you can use their services to get to market. There's about 4 or 5 good just providers of distribution. There's Believe also had a service which was just for uploading and delivery. So you pay a one-off fee just to get your content up there, and then you give them a service fee of maybe $20 a year or something for them to hold your content for you. So there's 4 or 5 services that you can use around here, but I don't know if there's something similar for the market here. Is there a service available?
Was your question about that, or was it about kind of what the best, as in Spotify, Apple, etc.? Is that more the question?
Не, правильно вопрос поняли. Мне как раз вопрос был о том, через какой сервис лучше всего залить музыку свою и получить больше выхлопа. Ну и для музыканта, то есть, чтобы он получил больше плюсов.
So it depends really on the music that you're creating. So SoundCloud is great because it's what it allows the music to do is kind of the people search out music on SoundCloud, so that's really good. I would say have it everywhere. That's the key. Have it everywhere, and if you have it everywhere, you're more likely for the people to find it. But when you have it everywhere, make sure that what you're doing is smart with Facebook, with Twitter, and make sure it's working with the music that you're putting out. So, making sure you have good social media presence. And that doesn't have to be like sell. It's more about kind of who are you, what do you want to stand for, and kind of, building a way I describe it now is Facebook is your magazine. What do you want your magazine to look like? That's the way to think about it. And so Spotify, you can put your music out there, but it's about building something on Facebook that allows people to feedback. So it's got to be a feedback loop, so that feed into each other. And if your artwork, I always say, this is my rule, if you think something is good, don't put it out there. If you think it's great, put it out there. Same on visuals, videos, music. You have to think it's great. If you think it's good, don't put it out there.
Thank you.
Я думаю, что остальные вопросы, наверное, можно будет в неформальной беседе. У нас сегодня время подошло к концу. Thank you, Каміл, thank you, Эллен, again. Спасибо всем. На сегодня все. Завтра я посмотрел расписание. Начало в 10:00. Здесь же в Центрум. И я думаю, что дальше уже модераторы завтрашнего дня ознакомят вас с программой. Спасибо.
This is the Selector. Brought to you by the British Council. 2 hours of the UK's best new music.
2 hours of the UK's best new music.
Cutting edge, emerging talents.
This is The Selector.
Це Selector, нова британська музика, 90 хвилин і всі найважливіші релізи останнього тижня чи кількох тижнів ви почуєте в передачі The Selector. Вони звуть Валерія Чичибая, а це гурт із найбільш англійською назвою з усіх, що можна собі уявити. The Shallocks, Chasing Shadows.
Is anybody over there? Are you following me? I look into the distance as far